Bolivie this year. I'm going to be moderating two different panels. Both are focused on the Global South and biochar. This panel will be an hour and a half long. Then we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll bring up the second set of panelists. This panel is mostly focused on those that are actually producing biochar in the Global South, with maybe one exception. So what we're going to do is give each panelist 10 minutes to go over what they're doing. I have a couple of questions for them, and then if you have questions that you want to ask at the end, then we will go over those. So just for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kathleen Draper. I'm the board chair emeritus of the International Biochar Initiative, been in the biochar world for about 15 years. I am really thrilled to see the Global South getting such focus. And if you didn't know already, we have one of the biggest biochar producers on the planet in Latin America. So I think this bodes well for the industry in general, that we're not just seeing it in the more developed world. So our first speaker is Axel Reynaud from Net Zero, and he is one of the few people I know that is second generation out of 3 generations that are working in the biochar industry. His father was a fellow board member of mine at IBI for many years, and now Axel has taken over the mantle. So, Axel, over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen, and hello everyone. Very happy to be here. I think it's great that we can talk about biochar in the Global South, because at least personally, I'm convinced that's where the opportunity is in terms of potential, of volume, and co-benefits. And that's what we focus at Net Zero. So I'll briefly explain what we do. I think the format is everyone spends a few minutes explaining what they do, and then we'll dive into the questions. Net Zero was founded 4 years ago with this idea that actually there was a model missing to scale this wonderful product that is biochar. And so what we've been trying to do over the last 4 years is to define the model and then prove that it could work, and that's what I'll be sharing very quickly with you. I'm not going to enter into what is biochar because everyone is supposed to know. I think the angle we're taking, and we will hear a lot about it in the panel, is of course the decarbonization angle, but also the transition to regenerative agriculture. And so the focus of Net Zero is to produce biochar really 100% for agricultural usage. That's what the majority of people are doing, but I know there are many other usages. We are one of the leading biochar players for a number of reasons. I think we are the only one, to my knowledge, where we are in multiple countries, actually multiple continents, with multiple plants. So we have 3 plants running, 1 in Africa, 2 in South America. We have 2 plants that we're finishing to build, and then we have a pipeline for this year. We'll build, depends if you count in modules or in plants, but something like between 5 and 8. So already starting to replicate a model. We're a company that has been supported from the beginning by tier 1 investors. So you see a few names here. Very committed, all very committed to decarbonization, to regenerative agriculture, and to the Global South. And I think that has played a very important role in our ability to finance our R&D and our growth. We are one of the finalists of the X Prize carbon removal competition. Actually, next Tuesday is the date where we finish to submit everything after 4 years of competition. But it probably shows that our model is scalable and economically profitable, which was part of the criteria. And we've been working with agri players to basically move to a model of insetting in agri value chains. So trying to keep the biochar and the carbon credits together to be accounted for in the value chain. I think that's a huge potential. We came around some numbers a few weeks ago on coffee. If you look at the net zero trajectory of how do you decarbonize coffee, half of the potential is biochar. So, and in other words, If you want to get net zero coffee, you need to have biochar, and biochar will account for half of the decarbonization, including agroforestry, including regenerative practices, including new varieties and the likes. So we're talking about something very important, and one of the key differentiators of net zero is this insetting approach and the circularity approach. Our model is quite specific. We develop at the core our own technology, of course the pyrolysis system, but everything that goes around it, the hardware, but also the software, the MRV system, the back office, in a very integrated way. We do an end-to-end approach, so we work at the one end with biomass suppliers, and we work at the other end with farmers, training the farmers and supplying them with tools to use biochar. We work in the tropics and the global south, but that's a bit obvious by being here. We work at scale. I was mentioning, plants that operate at industrial scale under pretty high industrial standards and already replicated. We work out of crop residues. We are very convinced that global south is where biochar will thrive, and we're also very convinced that crop residues is the way to go rather than wood. Wood is easier, but wood has limitations, and there's competition for wood and lots of other usages. And we operate a circular model. So we gather the biomass from farmers, we convert that to biochar, and we bring the biochar back to the same fields. And I think that's also quite differentiated from other players. We've been iterating on the technology. So we started with what we call Gen Zero or our MVP in Cameroon, which was a kind of aggregation of existing systems. Then we went and developed our first generation system, which is the plants that we are currently operating and building, which has a characteristics of being rather compact, very automated, with lots of safety design elements. It's also plants that are automated and connected. And we are moving, and that will be the news for this year, to a second generation system, which is much more compact, much easier to operate, much cheaper, much faster to build, and fully automated and remotely controlled. We think that's the way to go if you want to deploy at scale in the global south, because you can't have systems that require too many technical knowledge to be operated. They need to be very easy to install, very easy to operate, very easy to maintain. And so that's what we are developing. The picture doesn't fully show justice to the system, but it's done on purpose to hide the technical specificities. And we partner with agri players to develop solutions with two models. One where we basically build, own, operate the plants, and we basically insert our plants in existing supply chains. And the other where we built industrial partnerships with agri players who want to have access to our solution, to our systems, and basically we provide them the whole end-to-end solution. So not just the pyrolysis module, but everything, including the MRV, the certification of the carbon credits, and everything. And then they can decide what they want to do with the carbon credits. Do they want to inset them? Do they want to sell them? And we can help them there too. I think that's a very important lever to basically make biochar production and usage easy for lots of people. If you're a cooperative in coffee, in cocoa, in rice or whatever, and you're faced with, wow, I want to enter the biochar business, it's way too complex today, because you need to find multiple technology suppliers, MRV suppliers, certifiers, carbon credit distributors, etc., etc. And for those people, it's too complex. So we try to provide a one-stop shop solution, and that hopefully will help scale the model. So we're working with a long list of partners, very prestigious. I'm happy to see Beryl from Oiko that you will hear later, and we are very privileged to be working with Oiko on financing plants. But there are also many people around in terms of shareholding, in terms of financing, in terms of working in the agri supply chains, certifying. We're also working with people like WWF in Cameroon. So large number of people who have bought into our model and who are helping us to grow. I'm not going to take more time, but of course, happy to answer the questions later.
Thank you, Axel. It has really been fun to watch how fast you got up to speed. Of course, it is in your genetic DNA these days that you're working in biochar, but it's really impressive, I think. So our next panelist is Lisette from Arti, and Arti is one of those companies that's been around for an awfully long time, almost more than I have been in the business, but it's great to see your developments in the Global South, so why don't you tell us more?
Sure. So, hello with everyone. My name is Lisette. I am in charge of the grants department within the company Arti. So that's the reason why I will be talking about the projects that we have been developing in the Global South in order to promote biochar awareness and also to open the market within this part of the world. Let's see. Doesn't. Okay, but meanwhile, I can talk about the company. We are a green technology company that is focused on pyrolysis reactors. We transform waste residues into biochar as well in order to promote a carbon sequestration and in order to provide also the benefits of biochar as a soil amendment. There you can see the presentation. So we have our main headquarters in the US, but we also have offices in Ecuador and a leadership in Uruguay. We work in the USA with research and development. We have there some customer services as well, pilot testings. In Ecuador, we have our main manufacturing production facility, and also we have through leadership in Uruguay presence as well. The main objective of the company is to demonstrate the value of biochar and also the pyrolysis potential that it has. So we will be talking about the projects as I mentioned. One of the main projects that we began with as a company was in Nicaragua. We worked there with the NGO ESO. There we were producing biochar from rice hulls for benefit agricultural producers in Metagalpa, Nicaragua. And in order to test the potential of biochar to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions when it is applied into the soil. There, the important part also is that we work with engagement with the community. As you can see in the images at the bottom, we were doing radio interviews, television interviews, and also sharing through workshops with the people there the potential that biochar has, in order that they can understand the benefits that it can have, and they can also have a follow-up on the project later on. When we also talk about the South, we had a presence in Uruguay, as I mentioned, and we have been promoting there a carbon sequestration park. What does it mean? It involves the location of a pyrolysis reactor there in order to transform waste residues into biochar within Uruguay. This will have the potential also to process 6,000 tons per year in order to produce 1,500 tons of biochar and also have 3,000 tons of CO2 sequestered. For this project as well, as I mentioned, the collaborations are essential. If you have the possibility of putting a project there and start the market there, the collaborations, partnerships that you do are crucial. In this part, we had a collaboration with the municipality of Paysandú, that is a local community in Uruguay, in order to promote this not only with the municipalities, but also with universities that were there, with other companies that have residues, because in Uruguay, there is also a lot of biomass availability in the terms of forestry residues, for example, and also there is a lot of manure residues from the livestock farming that they manage as a country. Uruguay also has a lot of advantages in terms of the framework of the country in relation to installing green technologies. And that is also one important aspect when you are thinking about a project. Does the country has favorable conditions to put biochar and install? Does the country has favorable tax incentives for this? In the case of Uruguay, they have tax incentives for green technology application. If you are producing energy from green sources, reusing waste, and also decreasing emissions, they can provide you like 60% of decrease in the capex of your project. So looking for places when you can have all of these benefits is very useful in order to decide where to put your production machine. Now talking about Ecuador, we are managing two types of projects. Project number one is located in the Andean region. For this, we have also been working with NGOs. Collaboration is essential. Once again, that's the reason why we had also partnered with NGOs within the different regions. In Ecuador, the one that we are working on is Fundación Humana, People to People. There, we work with agricultural producers as well in order to make workshops with them, share with them the knowledge about biochar potential use. And we also have implemented our biochar within their lands in order that later on we can use that as case studies in order to promote the biochar market. Because when you want to open a new market in a new area, in a new country, and you want to sell it, they will ask you, apart from what is biochar, because that is one of the main questions that they do, is do you have successful case studies of your product in our type of soil? Because if you have in another part of the world, it's totally different. So when you have these successful case studies, it's more easy for you also to sell your product, while providing also the social benefits that it involves this type of projects, of course. The second project is related with the Amazon region. We are also working and planning on putting biochar in the Amazon, specifically applying the principle of circular economy. There are a lot of residues availability in the global south, specifically in the Amazon. All the agricultural residues that are available there from communities are available, so we can produce biochar. We can later on put inside the same land, implementing bioeconomy circularity, and we can avoid all the greenhouse gas emissions that are normally produced in these parts of the world, because the normal decomposition of the biomass, or even they burn sometimes the biomass instead of making it compost, for example. So for this project, the collaboration is essential also with NGOs. And our vision for the future, just to conclude, is for RT, we want to put biochar facilities within Latin America. Right now, we are doing all of these efforts to put it there. We are making these collaborations as well, and we want to become also a leading force in carbon sequestration and carbon credit generation in South America. So if you want to know more about these projects, also I will be here for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. So the next company we have here is Raycol, and I confess I'd never heard of it before. But it's been great over the last 2 years, especially to see the growth of the industry, and a lot of it is in the global south. So here to tell us more about Raycol and what you're doing in Kenya is Johannes Kern.
Yes, thank you very much. So the name is Recycle. It's always very difficult to pronounce it. No, but yes. Yes. Okay, so the presentation seems not to work, but yes. Thank you for the invitation here and for the introduction. My name is Johannes. We started with Recycle in 2020, so 5 years ago. As a student initiative, we mainly focused on the country Rwanda, where we produce biochar as an alternative cooking fuel. So in Rwanda, the most common practice is to cook on charcoal, and therefore we used the so-called toplet updraft system for the decentral production of biochar as an alternative cooking fuel. But time by time we saw a much bigger potential for biochar as a soil amendment for agriculture, rather than just using as a cooking fuel and simply burn it. And therefore we shifted the focus more to biochar for agriculture. Since March 2023, we founded the company Recycle, where we use not the top-to-up draft system anymore. We focus on the Contiki flame curtain technology. We see this as a very efficient technology to produce biochar in the global south, because in the global south in general we have a very high amount of unused biomasses, and so especially in the rural areas. And with the Contiki technology, we enable smallholder farmers to use this unused biomasses and produce a very effective fertilizer as biochar decentrally. So this is what we are mainly doing. Since 2 years, I'm also doing my PhD. Apart from that, on global supply chain analysis for biochar, where we investigate. We want to do it side by side, so I mean, biochar as a fertilizer depends a lot on the local climate and soil conditions and soil characteristics. How much yield can be really improved with the biochar? So in Germany or Europe, we don't have a very huge potential of using biochar in the agriculture, but especially in the global south, I think Axel already said that the yield is sometimes more than doubled. So the potential due to the local soil characteristics is very huge there. And this is why also we as Recycle, we focus on the production in the global south. This is so what we're doing. We are developing biochar carbon removal projects. We started our operation in Senegal. Senegal was a bit difficult from our perspective because of the biomass availability. So to produce 1 ton of biochar, you need 3 to 4 tons of biomass. And Senegal is a very dry country, so the biochar was very great for the soil there, but the biomass availability was too low. Therefore, we shifted our focus now to Rwanda and Tanzania. In Rwanda, we founded our first company, or the first company in the global south, the Recycle Rwanda Limited, where we have four full-time project managers that operate with a network of 140 smallholder farmers, which use our Contiki technology to produce biochar decentrally from their own fields, from their own unused biomasses for themselves, for the biochar themselves. Yes, as already mentioned, so today we work in those 3 countries, with the biggest production in Rwanda. There we have today 140 smallholder farmers, and just in Rwanda, we were already certified by Carbon Standard International with the global artisan C-Sync standard. We have bounded since April 2024 more than 400 tons of CO2. For this year, we are aiming for at least 2,000 tons. Here you see, just to get an impression how big the difference look like if the yield is more than doubled. So here on the field in Rwanda, the yield in some reason it depends. So it's hard to say how much the crop yield really increases. So it depends on the soil properties on the crop that you are planting. So it's different for maize or for potatoes, for sorghum, whatever you are planting. But here you see on the right side where we implemented biochar in the soil, the plants, they grow so much quicker. They are much more green. The maize stems, they are so much bigger. So it's a really impressive thing what biochar can do there for the agriculture. As already mentioned, for this year we want to produce at least 2,000 tons of carbon removal credits. We already have the funding for more than 1,000 tons of biochar carbon removal credits. In Tanzania, we want to integrate more into the coffee sector, to make the whole coffee supply chain carbon neutral or even carbon negative. We are already evaluating the production in Uganda. So this is how we always start when we get into a new country. So we start with the evaluation phase. We need to investigate how does the biochar really benefit the agriculture in this new country. This differs from soil to soil. For next year we are aiming for at least 4,000 tons of carbon removal credits in Rwanda and Tanzania, and by 2027 we want to produce at least 10,000 tons.
Thank you very much, Johannes. And not only did I get the company name wrong, but for some reason I thought it was Kenya, and I got that wrong too. So apologies. Okay, so now we're going to go all the way across the world to India. And I don't know how many of you are up on some of the big carbon removal credit purchases, but one of them has caused a big stir because Google purchased 100,000 tons of credits from a company called, and I'll probably mispronounce this too, Varaha? Right. Okay. Now, we don't have Varaha here, but we do have one of their strategic partners, which is Ankur Scientific. And to tell us more about what they're doing over there in India is Ankur Jain.
Hi, guys. So I made it all the way from India here. My presentation didn't. So you just have to hear me. There's nothing you can see. I'm really sorry. Yeah, so essentially we are a company that does gasification. We've been doing it for the past almost 38, 39 years now. The last 2 years have been very exciting because this is the first time we are seeing the biochar becoming the revenue driver for the machines we sell, right? The global south, as we all know, largest population, probably the largest GDP very soon, the largest growing population, the largest growing GDPs, and probably the largest amount of biomass in the world anywhere. So the global south is a given market, right? As a technology supplier and as a partner to some of these big boys who are trying to do the carbon removal, I think there are 2 or 3 things which personally I feel are very relevant, right? Soil enhancement is definitely one area where everybody's trying to work, which I think probably is a great area to work in. But as we go along, and if we want carbon sequestration to become more and more mainstream, which essentially then means you need to bring down the cost of these credits, you probably need to look at some other markets. So as a company, we're trying to experiment, apart from soil, looking at basically doing steel decarbonization, looking at construction decarbonization, etc. So where else can biochar go? So there are a bunch of areas where biochar can go, and that's what we're trying to look at. One more area which personally we believe in very strongly is that most biochar manufacturers today just do the biochar, right? What that basically does is that you lose about 50% of the energy in the biomass, right? So what happens is you use a process to make biochar, and the balance, which is the pyrolysis oil or the pyrolysis gas, is either used for the process itself. That really is not monetized, right? So coming from our background of gasification, where the product used to be the syngas itself, we were trying to market the syngas, we believe this combination is what would probably work wonders, wherein you not just do the biochar, so now our systems do 25% or more biochar, but you also do the syngas for an effective application. So that also needs to be monetized. If you can monetize that, then you probably reduce the price of the carbon credits, the sequestration credits. And we believe that is where the market will probably head, right? So thanks for hearing me. And yeah, open to questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, panelists. You were all very efficient. I prepared a few questions, one or two of which have already been answered. So I know you got these ahead of time, and I'm going to skip some of them. But I guess one thing I would like to hear you talk about, and we certainly heard Ankur's view on the price of credits, but I'm constantly asked what I think will happen to the price of both biochar and carbon credits. And I have no crystal ball. But maybe for those of you that have a point of view on this, if you could talk about where you see the price of the biochar in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, and same thing for the carbon credits. Who would like to?
happy to use my crystal ball, but it's not working very well. So big caveat. I think the price of biochar, generally speaking, should go down if we want to maximize its usage, at least for agriculture. You know, for other value-add stuff, I'm not expert. For agriculture, the lower the price, the more the uptake by farmers, the better the business case for them. And if we're in the global south, many farmers anyway don't have lots of money. So, you know, if we want to make this thing accessible, price need to go down. On the other hand, I think carbon credits prices are going to go up. I know there are some reports by consultants saying that prices will go down. I strongly disagree with that. Yes, the manufacturing technology will probably get some savings, but there's two driving factors. One is the supply and demand, basic economics. Today, there's probably, you know, market equilibrium between buyers and suppliers. If we look forward, you know, 2030, 2040, the requirement for carbon removal from the voluntary market, but also from the regulated market, you know, will go up much faster than the production. Most of you might not realize biochar accounts today for more than 90% of all the carbon removal in the world. Okay, we hear a lot about DAC, BECS, enhanced weathering and the like. They are almost nothing. Biochar is the dominant one and will remain the dominant one in the decade to come. But despite that, biochar will not scale fast enough to meet the demand. So I think prices will go up for that reason. I think it's also good that price of biochar goes up because it helps subsidize the lower price of the biochar. So I'd say the ideal world, you know, biochar price going down and carbon credit prices going up. And I think the carbon credit price, there will be hiccups along the way because this is not a very fluid market and it's very new, but tendentially should go up because of just the immense needs going forward for carbon removal.
I have a slightly different view there. So I believe the carbon credit prices ideally should go down, right? If you look at the buyers today, the buyers are the big software giants in the world who have gross margins of north of 70%. These are the only guys who are really buying these, right? If you want if you want 1.5 degrees, if you want lesser than 2 degrees, if you want carbon removal to happen at the scale it needs to happen, then you need lower pricing, more mainstreaming of this, which basically then means that the biochar itself has to be priced higher, right? If the biochar prices go up, the bio credit prices go down, right? And the biochar prices go up, Axel is right there. You can't do it to a farmer unless and until somebody else subsidizes that. So I come from India. We probably have so many farmer suicides, right? Now the farmer, if you make the fertilizer more expensive, won't be able to pay more, right? That's where the government interventions have to come in, which is also where I believe other interventions where biochar will be used for different applications has to come in. And so the biochar price then needs to shoot up there. And to my mind, the biochar credit prices need to then come down.
Well, it's good because we have a bit of a debate, but I'll jump in later.
Yeah, I think for our case, we cannot see it as two separate markets. So for us, or as you already said, I think the carbon credit, the price for carbon credits relates on the price for biochar. But I think so how we work, so we work together with smallholder farms. We empower them to produce their own biochar, and we even give them money for that. So we give them the technology and we give them access to the carbon removal market that we have today. And yes, so currently how it works, we give them the technology and we give them money for producing their own biochar for their own soils. So for them it's today a win-win situation, and we give them the money, we give them at least 50% of the revenue of the carbon credits as a compensation for the work that they are doing. But what we already see is a increasing interest in the biochar rather than the money that we give them, because they see how good it is for their soils, and therefore, just for our case, so not from the industrial perspective, we might strongly see a decrease in the price, because the interest in the biochar itself as a product it's much higher, even more than the interest in the carbon removal prices.
That is music to my ears. Last year, I reviewed about 24 proposals from different biochar producers for carbon credit buyers, predominantly from the global south, and I would say 75% of them relied 100% on the carbon removal credits, and their philosophy was zero for the biochar, and I think that's fine for the first few months while you're determining the value for smallholder farmers, but it is super risky if you are really going to depend completely on carbon credits, since it is such a new market and we don't know what certain administrations are going to do to some wealthy buyers. So I'm glad to hear that. Lisa?
Yes, in order to add what has been already told, I think, it is not too certain about what will happen in the future. There are a lot of different events that can influence this. There's also government decisions about the incentives that they give, both for their producers, as I mentioned, like the reductions that they can have in taxes when you produce biochar, but also the incentives that they can give to farmers to adopt this kind of technology. In the US, they are also having already incentives for agricultural producers to have this kind of products and to subsidize part of it. Even if they combine it with compost, they also will have benefits. So I think that it will also, that is an important factor to consider when we are talking about these possible forecasts of the prices. And also that I think we need to consider when we are talking about lowering the value of carbon credits is that if we want that it sequesters the correct amount or the most amount of carbon in order that we really reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, we need to procure it to have it as high quality biochar. So when we can have high contents of organic carbon, for example, we can have low H to carbon ratios at the same time. So we need to be careful that while lowering this cost of carbon credits or the cost of biochar, we don't sacrifice the quality of the final product and also don't sacrifice the potential of sequestering carbon that it has.
Yeah, I would totally support what you've said. I think we need to raise standards. Standards are too lax today, even the ones that are supposed to be very stringent, and that will add costs. And let's face it, if we want high quality carbon removal, we need high cost because of traceability, because of audit, because of monitoring. That will build into the cost of carbon credits. The second thing is, I think this industry is not profitable. This industry has been living out of subsidies, NGOs, and so on. And at the current price of carbon credits, this industry can be barely profitable. But a barely profitable industry will not scale to the gigaton because it will not attract the capital needed. So we need higher prices on carbon credits to attract investors because of the high margins. And so there's the supply-demand thing that will probably play, but let's stop thinking that we can sell a carbon credit at $130 or $140 with an offtake agreement. This is crazy. The industry is killing itself in the foot because basically making zero margin today and zero margin in the future, and so there will not be money to scale. So carbon credits should be above 200. I'm kind of a bit pushing the thing. Last argument for higher prices, regulation will start to make bridges between carbon removal and other markets. Today, if you look at aviation, everyone's talking about sustainable aviation fuel. Actually, today, it's way cheaper to keep using kerosene and use carbon removal, even at $200 or $300 per carbon credit. I'm not saying that, we should get rid of sustainable aviation fuel, but there are markets where actually high price carbon credits make sense. And this whole industry, I think, needs to think value and high prices, especially at the beginning. If a nascent industry starts to kill itself right from the beginning by trying to go at the lower price, basically this industry will remain that little room, 10 years from now. And we don't want it, and the climate doesn't want it.
I think Axel's going to beat me up after this, so I hope not. Again, coming from India, been in an industry which is renewable energy, subsidized heavily by the government in the beginning. I don't think subsidies work. If the business model is based on a subsidy, it doesn't work, right? It has to stand on its own feet, and which is exactly why I believe the biochar prices have to go up. Because, see, end of the day, the industry does well if the buyers are doing well. If your buyer can't afford to buy you, the industry is not going to grow because the buyer is not going to grow. And so, my view, there are people trying to sell credits at $100 a ton now, which is still at $250 on the biochar price. Now, the problem is that you are making 1:4. From 4 kgs of biomass, you're making about 1 kg of biochar, and add to it your manpower costs and your financing costs and all of that. And that's where the trouble is, right? The 50% energy that you're losing out is where the problem is, or our inability to monetize the biochar is where the problem is. So my view on things is that it has to become a market. It is a market, but it cannot be a subsidy-driven market. It cannot be a market which is all the time regulated. You have Trump coming in. Trump leaves Paris Agreement day 2 of his presidency, right? So the world is so, crazy. We don't know what's going to happen. But if we can make the biochar prices attractive, so when I say attractive is you have applications where biochar becomes the go-to scenario. That's where the credits prices can come down. And attached to that, using energy from the biomass itself, so kind of doing technology which uses energy as well. I think that's the only way this really scales, to my mind, right?
I will ask if that could be the last time we would mention Trump's name today.
Yes. So maybe one point. So you're speaking about the profitability. So that it's not profitable enough to sell those to get into the market with such low price. But I think we also need to integrate the buyer's perspective. So for them, if it's simply way too expensive to invest in carbon credits of above 200 euros, then I think this would limit the scale up to gigatons as well. So I think we should not just think from the supplier side, but also from the buyer side. So we cannot just say, okay, we need this price of 200 euros or whatever in order to get very profitable, and in order to scale up very quickly. We also need to think from a buyer's perspective. For example, in the chemical industry, or let's say chemical industry, they produce per euro of income, they produce up to a half a ton of CO2. Therefore, it will never get. They will never be able to pay the prices of more than 5 euros per ton of CO2. So I think if we really want to integrate into the whole value chain, the whole car market, I think we somehow need to diversify the market.
An industry that starts shooting low in prices at the beginning is dead. And I think that's the problem of what we're doing. Let's remember, biochar is the cheapest solution for long-term carbon removal. So there are guys selling at 500, 1,000, think about, DAC, enhanced rock weathering, and the likes. So it's not the time to lower the prices. It's not the time to think about it. And yes, of course, maybe 20 years from now, prices will come down. But this is not for today.
But I will say some of those selling at the high prices are going out of business because they have no other revenue streams. So I think they are unrealistic. But I'm not arguing. I would love to see high prices, but it's interesting in the especially fossil fuel industry that are negotiating for credits. They are definitely trying to be sub 100, and I don't think that helps anybody right now since we are the best game in town. So, well, I should have brought boxing gloves here. I didn't realize that was going to cause such a fun discussion. I think I'll go for something a little less controversial. I was going to ask a question about the key markets. Most of you seem fairly focused on agriculture. I, for the last 5 years of my biochar career, have been focusing on non-agricultural uses of biochar, mostly in the built environment. Curious if you're thinking of that. In the US, I will just say that concrete and asphalt are big ones. The challenge is economics. If you think farmers don't want to pay a lot for biochar, concrete manufacturers want to pay even less, and they want the carbon credits. So it's a challenge. So I've been exploring for years where to, and I'm wondering if you guys are seeing any potential markets beyond agriculture. It can still be in the land, but beyond farmers.
At net zero, we are not considering any other thing, at least, in the years to come. Couple of reasons. When you produce biochar in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, what do you do with it? The shipping cost plus the emissions of that shipping basically kills the model if you need to, bring it far away. That's one reason. Second reason is you maximize co-benefits by, going through a circular model, by bringing the biochar back to the farmers. And I think that's one of the very strongly differentiating factors of biochar versus any other carbon removal solution. And so I think we should continue to push for that. And last thing, there's an emerging market for insetting. Large, agri players, large consumer brands are thinking about insetting as the way to decarbonize. We were here last year with someone from Nespresso. We've been working with them to decarbonize their supply chain, and they want the biochar to go back to their farmers and to account for the carbon credits in their supply chain. And so for all those reasons, at least for now, there's a huge potential. Now, in the long-term future, probably, producing biochar is in a way producing renewable carbon. And renewable carbon can serve so many things. And Kathleen, you've been very innovative at doing many things with biochar. So long run, if we have too much biochar, I'm sure there will be lots of applications. At least in the global south, the way we do it at net zero, for the moment, it's agriculture, agriculture, and agriculture.
This time I totally agree. And maybe just to add, I think one advantage for agriculture is as well that it's today the most advanced way to use biochar. So I think for the concrete industry, for the steel industry, horticulture, asphalt, whatever, it's not as advanced as it is for agriculture, and it's very easy to integrate biochar in the supply chain for agriculture. It's much more complicated for other industries. I think this is why agriculture is developing the fastest.
So as a manufacturer, we are looking at various options. So we've started some experiments on concrete making. We're working with the Japanese on some of those projects. We're trying to see where it goes. We don't know where it'll go. We're working on steel as a sector. Steel as a sector is very exciting because it's a tough to abate sector. And this could be an exciting way for them to do it. So yeah, like I said, my belief is we need to have more and more buyers for biochar itself. And the farmer will anyway get benefit because it's his biomass we are picking up. So yeah, we're working on various options.
As a company, we are also focused on the agricultural application of biochar as our main use. But also we have seen interest of customers of using biochar as potential substitute of activated carbon, both for filtration or for absorption of heavy metals, specifically in lands that have already been damaged because of chemical spreads, for example, or chemicals that came to that specific land through groundwater, for example, it can be an option. So they are also interested in how can I remediate my soil while using biochar, not only for increasing crop yields, that is the main application or the most common ones that we talk about, but also like to absorb these heavy metals or contaminants that soil can have in order to remediate the soil and improve the land that I will be working on. So those are options. We have been exploring the possibilities of doing this activation of biochar within our laboratory scale at our company. But a challenge that we need to consider is that if we want to reach the production scales that we want to reach, these megatons of sequestering carbon, it is very difficult also to activate it in a large scale, since for activation you need a lot of procedures, you also need a lot of energy. So these are also considerations if you want to implement a new process or a new methodology of production for making it biochar specific for other purposes in the market. So if you are also thinking about using biochar for other purposes, you would also need to analyze if the extra processing that you will be required to do in biochar will also reach the amount or will allow you to have the processing capacity that you are looking for.
Not only that, but also how it impacts your LCA and whether it's available for carbon credits. And I think this is the big thing with steel. I mean, that's an endless opportunity, and that in not just in the North America, but everywhere, most biochar producers end up selling as green charcoal, biocoal, whatever you want to call it, because it's just bottomless need there, but you're not going to get carbon credits for it. So a lot, including Arigna, are really trying to figure out how to pivot, and that's where market development is really important. Okay, so no real fighting on that one. I'm going to ask a couple of easy ones, and then if you have questions, I'll go to the audience. What do you think will help scaling most biochar production and use in the global south? I know, Axel, you're going to say the price of carbon credits. He's done.
Profitability.
I would add the part of logistics. I think it is crucial to have good logistics between the biomass supply and also how you distribute the biochar to the different markets. Because if you are going to also have different markets about biochar, not only agricultural use, but also other uses, filtrations, as I mentioned, you need to consider that you will need to distribute all of that material along the way. And also in global south, specifically in the part of South America that I am more related with, and there is this challenge of logistics. So if you want to reach the agricultural side, for example, you would need to see if there are roads to access it, because sometimes it can happen that the roads available are not that easy to reach through your production, or they are very distributed, the agricultural producers, among all the regions. So that is also an important consideration that you need to have in mind while considering a project.
So scale, I think basically we have to find more users. Global South, in some ways, some parts of the world, like India, is a tough country because contracting is not signed in stone, right? So like you said, logistics become a problem. You do a project, you develop a project, you have biomass at a certain price, and then you don't get the biomass at that price, and that kind of kills the profitability. Yeah, but I think basically the scale up has to happen, to my mind, again and again, through more and more users and proving more and more use for the biochar in different formats: construction, road making, filtration, plastics. I was speaking to somebody here on the plastic front, etc.
Beyond profitability, there's, I think, a couple of things we need to keep in mind. Maybe most people take it for granted, but I'd say technology. Today, there is no suitable technology for scaling biochar in the global south. There's a lot of companies trying to do things with whatever is available, on the artisanal front and on the industrial front, but the killer technology is not there. wait a few months, maybe our Gen 2 is going to be the killer technology. But it's really important. If you've run plant, very few people have been running plants at above 90% availability 24/7, in the global south with crop residues. If you don't do that, there's no way you can be profitable. There's no way you can produce a quality product. And this is super tricky. Generally speaking, even doing that in France is tricky. I doubt anyone is doing it. But if you're in the global south with, lack of, technical resources, plants that are in the middle of nowhere and so on, you need actually a very specific technology to do that. And I think this is missing yet. The other thing that is missing is simplicity to deploy, because it's not just about let's put a pyrolysis machine somewhere and boom, we have a biochar business. You need the upstream supply chain, you need the pre-processing of the biomass, you need the pyrolysis, you need the distribution, you need the tracking, you need the MRV, you need the carbon credit certification, and on and on and on. And for many players, this is kind of too complex. It's such a fragmented environment with mostly artisanal solutions there. And I think one of the answers is to come with packaged solutions. That's what also we're trying to do. Make it super easy for someone who has biomass or who has access to biomass to deploy a full supply chain, not a pyrolysis machine. And I think, again, that's something that is needed. It might be needed, in the north, but it's even more needed in the global south because, again, lack of, engineering, lack of technicians, and the likes. And this is a nut that has not been cracked yet. Until we do that, we'll do small projects here and there. But if you want to roll it out at the scale of, tens, hundreds of thousands of production centers in the global south, if you look at the potential, plants like what Net Zero built, we think the potential is 100,000 in the global south. Full potential, If you want to bring a business at that scale, you need solutions that are super easy to deploy and operate. And this is not in the market yet. It's around the corner. Huh?
Good news.
I think Axel hasn't worked with us, so.
Oh, now the kissing and makeup phase has started. All right. Last question from me. What words of advice would you have for somebody looking to start up biochar production in the global south? Speechless.
I always have advice. Work with us.
And with us. Now, joke about, I think you need really to think, well, where you start, because it's a bit like real estate, Biochar is location, location, location. You need the source of biomass, you need the right soil, you need the right usage of the biochar. And I think, where you start and the kind of contracts you can have that secure over the long run access to biomass and distribution of biochar is really critical. It's too easy to say, oh, I found a pile of biomass here, I'll put a little kiln here, I'll produce biochar, and then I'll scratch my head to make a business. It's really about thinking about how a whole system can work and starting from where, because biomass doesn't travel. Lizette was mentioning all the road issues and so on. Even in Europe, it's complicated to move biomass around, but even worse in the global south. Biochar, same thing, very bulky, does not travel well, and you're killing yourself if you move it too much because basically all the CO2 of the trucks go against your LCA. So I would say really think locally and think about the end-to-end system and how to make it sustainable over time, not a one-shot production of biochar.
Well, I'm also going to add, because I've seen some companies flame out sooner than they should have, is don't just make your purchasing decisions on the price of a piece of equipment. It's It's critical, I would say, for you to go visit an operational plant that's using not only the equipment that you're using, but the feedstock preferably, because there's a lot of promises out there on uptime and yield and all this stuff. And if you buy equipment that you have not gone and kicked the tires on, buyer beware. That's my 2 cents.
Also, what I would like to add is something I really did an emphasis in the presentation that I had. It is about the collaborations that you can have. When you are looking about a project and you have already partners in that specific country that can help with the, like providing like advice on the legal part, for example, or they already have experience with agricultural producers, you have already communication with agricultural associations, for example, that will help that your project can also scale and that you can put there a biochar production facility. So all of these collaborations with the academia, for example, of the part of research, all of these can help you in order that you can put there and you can have the most impact of it. And also an important thing, talking about the location of your project is, as I mentioned before, where do you have more favorable conditions to put your project? If you're analyzing different countries, which ones have laws, incentives that can better benefit your project as well, especially at the beginning when you're looking to invest on this. And also, if you have, for example, also incentives for putting carbon credits on this, that is also a contribution or a benefit that you can have while installing in this specific part of the world. That would be my advice.
And I will also add that you need more time. I think if you want to develop something here in Europe, I think you know how it works, you know how the market is. But for such a new market, I think you need much more time because things are not going very quick, and many things do not go as planned, and you need to switch spontaneously. So I think you need time.
Although I would say that's not just in the global south. I always advise people it's going to take at least twice as long as you think it is, and get started on your market development for the biochar side before you've even started on figuring out what equipment to get. So, okay, thank you, panelists. I want to give you a round of applause. We actually have about 30 minutes for audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I think we have somebody that is going to, well, in the meantime, I'll just get up. If you would just stand up, state your name, business, and question.
My name is Bart Hagebeek. Actually, I'm a developer of organic fertilizers and biostimulants, and I'm very interested in the innovations with biochar. And I've been looking for biochar as a soil improver. And actually, I'm a bit worried about the interest in biochar in the average farmer, because everybody relies on fresh manure, compost, and mineral fertilizers, but they forget about biochar. And I think if we want to increase the market for biochar, we need to have initiatives and new promotion of biochar. How are we going to solve this in Europe? That's, well, I can ask here, but no. So I think there's so much interest from the biogas market that produces digestate, and from the digestate they want to go into pyrolysis to produce biochar. But we need to have a market for that. So, I mean, we can be convinced about the effect of biochar, but how can we convince the average farmer to use biochar?
Well, I can take a quick crack because I've talked to a lot of these guys in Europe and the US, and that is a constant question. And we, as Lisette mentioned, had this Code 336 funding from the USDA to help pay for biochar for American farmers. We thought it was going to change the industry, and that was 3 years ago, and we might have had less than a dozen farmers adopt it. And part of the problem was that the agricultural extension agents from USDA were never taught about biochar. So now we are trying to get these case studies done in different soils with different crops, using different types of biochar, because I think that's what's needed. Farmers need to hear it from other farmers. It's not like they need to hear it from a biochar producer who is probably not a farmer, is probably not an agronomist. We need those coalitions she was talking about to really get interested and help spread the word from a trusted source. It's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think it also works in the global south, you know. Basically, farmers are conservative, generally speaking, and they want to see the proof. And even if you show them, you know, a scientific study or something done, you know, in their region, they still want to test it in their plot of land. We are working with very, very small, you know, coffee farmers in Cameroon and very large sugarcane players in Brazil, you know, and the whole scope. Same approach. I want to see it in my field. So, of course, the Cameroonese farmer, it will be completely ad hoc. The other guy at the other extreme will have an army of agronomists and they want to do very specific trials, but it's always the same. And that goes to the point of it will take more time that you were mentioning. You need to think, you know, before people take on, you know, large volumes of biochar, they will want to test it. And if they're growing beans or tomatoes, after a few months, or corn, they can see the result and they can be convinced. If they are doing, you know, palm, coffee, cocoa, tree-like stuff, they might need to wait, you know, 4 or 5 years before they are convinced. And at least for now, there's no shortcut. They want to see it in their field, the biochar put with their hands on their plants and their measurements, you know, and it's a fact of life. Now, the good news is that within this immense number of farmers, there are some innovators, and they are willing to start the test while others are just sitting and say, oh, I'll wait my neighbor, you know. And so you need to start identifying those guys, work with them, start to scale within their plots of land, and then gradually the thing will, you know, develop. But it will take an awful lot of time.
I would like to add there that has worked with us in terms of rural communities and agricultural producers is to try to not say to them, okay, stop using your compost, stop using what you're already doing and put biochar, because probably they can do it for the test that you are proposing. But otherwise, they will not continue doing that. So the approach that we have been doing is, okay, do you have already a sustainable agricultural practice in place? How can we combine biochar with that? So for example, in the case of the Andean region, they are already doing compost. So the people there are already used to how they make their own compost and how they apply it. So we recommend, okay, you can mix in this proportion with the compost, and you can try in your own land, half with a compost and biochar and the other half with just compost, in order that you can see with your own practices which is the difference while you are adding biochar, in order that they can see this. And also the benefit of working, for example, with agricultural associations is that normally you don't need to try this with every single farmer, but when you have an association and you have like 5 successful studies, they share this experience with the whole association of farmers, and it is more easy that later on you can go to that association and say, okay, this product worked, and they trust each other, right? They already had the confidence in the product, so it is more easy for you to go and sell the product as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Nate Macmillan. I represent AEL CCS. I'm a carbon dioxide removal project developer. I've heard Mr. Axel speaking early on about business not being profitable, and I just want to give my 2 cents and maybe just ask some questions. I think we should, you know, gravitate towards biochar as a business, you know, and then we are also sleepwalking into the same challenges which the rest of the decarbonisation silos are doing. Like one big issue is there's modern day slavery in some of these decarbonisation silos. You know, one example is electrical vehicle battery raw materials, the whole supply chain. And then with biochar, biochar is synonymous with the global south. You know, when I speak to most developers, most OEMs, they seem to be doing it on a philanthropic basis. I think from my, speaking for myself, I've been headhunted by a few carbon development developers, you know, being offered big wages, and I'm thinking that some of that money does not cascade down to those farmers. The gentleman mentioned something about farmers committing suicide. And then to the sustainability agencies and bodies, there doesn't seem to be any effort to do capacity development, to have people in the global south do the certification, verification. I think there's a lot of people flying from abroad, you know, maybe business class, to go and do certification and verification. And that's where all the money is being lost, you know. So I think we should actually have a paradigm shift and do biochar as a business, to have a premium biochar where there's equitable wage parity, where people being paid the same. If I'm working out of London, the lowest paid person on our projects should be actually be getting the minimum wage out of London. Thank you.
Nate, I just want to have you save part of that question for the next group, because we will have people from the certification agencies. This is more the producer side, but it's an excellent question.
But you know, I think you touch a very important point around, you know, it's not just about producing biochar, it's how you produce it, you know. And I think it's a wonderful product where you can have incredible co-benefits if you do it right. But if it's, you know, modern slavery with, you know, child labor to get the residues, and then, you know, none of the value going to the farmers because you start to do an extractive model and the biochar doesn't go back to the farmers, then, you know, this is questionable. I think one of the things the industry must do, and that will rise costs, hence we need to rise the price of carbon credits, is to be very strong on ESG standards, I would say. Because if there are big scandals in this nascent industry, that can kill it. Also because, especially if you're thinking about the insetting model, where big brands, like, you know, I was mentioning Nespresso, but you can imagine the Starbucks, the Mars, the Unilevers, and of this world, they are very concerned about what's happening in their supply chain. And you want to be able to demonstrate them very strongly that indeed things are done right, following the right standards, that there's no child labor, that there's no usage of unlawful pesticides, that there's no impact on water quality, on air quality, etc., etc. And of course, that also goes to the standards in terms of certification for the carbon credits, just on the carbon part, but it goes more broadly on the ESG thing. And I think we really need to push the industry to raise those standards. Again, a nascent industry needs high margin and high standards. It needs to be born on solid ground, and then it can grow. You know, at Net Zero, we are going to meet the IFC standards this year. And I think this is a differentiating factor because you want to be safe to be for people who want to do business with you. And especially in the global south, where we all have our horror stories, we need to be super, super cautious and build that in the price. Build that in the price of the carbon credits to begin with.
So I think one of the issues is that we're talking about the global south here, right? Now, I hear this a lot, that standards from the developed countries should move to the developing nations, right? For example, in Calcutta, you still have people who drive their own rickshaws with their muscles, with their bodies, right? I mean, they're kind of bicycle rickshaws transporting people. Now the point is that Axel is right. You improve standards, you increase price. Do you have a large enough market for that, right? That's my question. And if you're making biochar, end of the day, you're putting more money in the hands of the farmer anyway. That is happening. That's a fact. Because he was not getting paid for the residue, which now he's getting paid for, which is a great beginning. Because if you had farmers, so many people not making money, you now have some more money coming into their families. That, I think, makes a huge difference. if we talk about the highest standards coming into this nascent industry, coming into the global south where, frankly, at times the conditions of living are so poor, I'm not sure that really works out. That's what you probably want to get to in a few years, in a few decades to my mind. But if you start from that perspective, I'm not sure that lets the industry survive.
I will say there's this conversation that you sometimes hear about carbon colonialism, which I think speaks to what you were talking about, where you have folks from the north going down and doing these carbon projects, and a majority of the funding from the revenue side goes back to the north. And I think we need to be very cautious about not doing that. And I don't know what the controls are, but when I review projects for potential buyers of the carbon credits, that's a flag I put out there, because 50% has to stay and benefit the local community, or it's just unjust.
Yeah, but with the methodology that at least we are doing, we give at least 50% to the local community. So I think this is how we avoid exactly what you are speaking about. Yeah, of course, it's very important. Yes.
Leonard.
Yeah, hi, writer, journalist who worked in the Global South in humanitarian work. I've seen a beautiful methanization project in Haiti fall on its face because nobody communicated with the people who were supposed to cook their food on the methane coming from their neighbors. It was a total disaster. And I don't hear anybody talking about how you're going to deal with consumers. You're talking about food and agriculture, that whole food chain. What story do you tell? And how do you make sure that the PAH isn't leaking into the system all over the place? How do you think you tell that story so that the man and woman in the street who know nothing about biochar in France or in the Global South probably today actually come to understand it and don't get some weird warped view of what it is through social media? How do you deal with that part of the problem?
So you mean the problem that that the project is not very sustainable, or what exactly? Yeah, that it's not yeah, this is what I mean with sustainable. Yes, so I think this is what we already said. So this is what I meant with time. So it takes time. We cannot do it very quick. And this is what Axel said, with the people want to see it in their soil. And I think that once the people, so the farmers, when we go there and we speak with those small farmers, they say, okay, I give you 2 times 2 meter and just show me that the biochar is good, and then it improves and it improves, and and then by the next season they say, okay, now you can use my whole field to utilize the biochar there. Therefore, I think to make it sustainable in this case, that it's really long lasting, I think, yeah, we just need time, and the people need to see the benefit itself.
How are you, before some journalist comes along and starts poking at it, how do you guarantee that there's no polyaromatic hydrocarbons in the biochar going into the food chain? If you're going to do it on a decentralized, beautiful story you're telling about it, but how do you guarantee that before it goes sour?
Well, that's the issue about the technology and the production system. Today basically we talk about biochar, and I should have put my usual warning. There's no such thing as biochar. Biochar is like if you say vehicles. It can be mopeds, it can be airplanes, it can be trains. Biochar can be produced out of very different feedstocks under very different conditions. Of course, get different carbon content, but then get or no contaminants and the likes. I think the issue you're pointing is very important, is that a lot of biochar that is produced is dubious if you really look at what's inside, and polyaromatic and, those kind of contaminants, and I'm not talking about heavy metals and the likes. And it's super important to control that. And this is by having the right production system and the right technology. And, you want, this, the EBC standards on, various degree of, biochar quality, every biochar producer should strive to be at least, meeting the EBC standard for agriculture. We produce a biochar that is EBC feed, and so can be used to feed cattle, and we use that in the fields actually. So it's way higher quality. But this is because there's a very strong control on the process. And yes, there's a risk that by, dumping stuff that is vaguely black and come from some kind of pyrolysis system and saying this is biochar, that we end up doing some contamination. There's lots of risk in this industry, And because there's very little barrier to entry, basically you dig a hole in the ground, you put something, you burn it, and you say, I have biochar. There are many, many risks. That's why I'm saying, we need to have very high standards. This is a technology business. It's not a small-scale artisanal stuff. It needs to have, lots of control, and prices needs to be high to pay for all of this. Otherwise, this industry can blow 5 years from now by a journalist because, looking at the content of the biochar, or because the biochar is produced with child labor, or because, we certified some volumes of biochar that actually ended up being burnt and not put, in the safe storage, etc., etc. This is a big risk for this industry. And we need to be aware and to keep standards very high. And what is dubious biochar should not be called biochar. I mean, I think that's the problem from this industry, is that it started from, very simple to produce thing. And now it needs to move, it needs to move to industry standards, quality, if we want to scale. Otherwise, you're right, the thing will blow to the face of the industry in a few years.
I just want to say, I don't believe it's either or. I think it's both. And I think in many indigenous cultures, they made safe biochar for thousands of years. I think you can make good biochar in low-tech ways. I think you can make bad biochar in low-tech ways. The whole topic of PAH is fraught with a lot of misconceptions. So I think it's kind of dangerous to talk about it as if this is bad and it's always bad, because it's not. It's a very complicated subject. I hope, but I have seen journalists come in and make those claims without any science behind it. So it is a real fear, but I don't think it's just industrial. We need industrial, but I think there are a lot of situations where low tech makes sense. It's been happening forever. We just need to do the right amount of training so you're not using wet biomass. There's ways to avoid making bad char. So I'm a believer, and it is scalable in many forms. We need big scale for climate reasons. We need small scale for air pollution and things like that. And we need more storytellers to get out there and show that it's not just one size fits all.
Yeah, exactly. I can just agree. And I think this is also the responsibility of the product developer, so to make sure that it's good.
Stephen, who has been in the biochar world as long as I have. Oh, you got one.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm called Steve Poole. I was trained as an environment technician for the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've heard a lot about investors having cold feet on biochar. What can you say about cold feet? Investors, they base their investments on confidence. Now, confidence isn't something willy-nilly. It's not a question of opinion. It's something which has been scientifically studied in quality control. And it all boils down to standards, or to use the French term, normalization. In an industry where standards are applied, you can be sure that the quality of the products are going to be good. You can be sure that if the quality control is done properly, you can be sure that the industry will be profitable, because quality control is a way of making sure that maintenance is maintained, that standards are maintained, and in that case, the industry will be profitable, as profitable as it may be, knowing fully well that it'll be on fairly low margins. And an investor, if he's going to invest in low margins on capital risk, he wants confidence. And it's all a question of standardization, ensuring the feedstock is good quality, the biochar is good quality, that the standard of education, and the IBI now does training schemes for people so that they know exactly what they're doing. And in that case, the investors, they these days, knowing what we know for the last 20 years after thousands of studies being made of biochar, they should be able to have enough confidence to invest in the industry, I think. Well, I think the question has already been largely answered by by members of the panel, but I'd just like to add a bit from the scientific point of view.
And thank you for the plug for IBI, Stephen. One last question, anybody?
Hi, my name's Karan. I'm co-founder of an organization called Grow Trees. We plant trees as ways for companies and individuals to go green. Have planted about 20 million trees so far, and looking to get into biochar because it's of the strong impact, and also because it's a natural synergy for us, given we have access to a lot of different biomass and feedstock. Would appreciate any advice on how to think about what feedstock to use. We have access to quite a bit, as mentioned. Beyond trial and error, and looking at different applications, how would you go about determining what the right feedstock is for biochar production?
Okay, you might have to narrow that question down a little bit, but does anybody want to give it a shot right now?
I mean, you can do biochar in a profitable way out of a very broad range of crops, but there are things that make it easier or more difficult. So ideally, you want something relatively dry or not too difficult to dry. You want something with relatively high lignin content. You want something that has a granulometry that is not all over the place, so especially you want to limit fines. And you want biomass that is kind of accessible, so somehow centralized, So these are the ideal criteria. And then you are somewhere, and then you need to find, a kind of equilibrium, and the perfect biomass does not exist, or might not exist in volume. So, there are people, I think, producing biochar out of pretty much everything. But there are some biomasses that are, it's like the hard slope on the mountain. If you go for something that is very wet, very uneven in granularity, that you need to pick up in fields, and has low lignin content, then, it's going to be more of a challenge. But, it depends where your project is. Usually, in one region, there's 2, 3, 4 dominant crops. You need to start from there. It's not just about the characteristics of the crops. It's also, can you secure the biomass over a long period of time through offtake contracts with farmers or some form of arrangement, so that it's not a kind of one-off thing, and then basically you build the plant and there's no feedstock. So it's not only the biomass, it's also the kind of contracts you can build.
That was an excellent answer. I wish that was recorded. I get asked that all the time, and I really like how robust of an answer it was. So yeah, and how much it costs, and how long you can contract it for. But anybody else want to add to that? All right, well, I think we're pretty close to the hour. We are going to have another session in 15, 20 minutes, so please come back. And we will be talking with a broader group of people still in the global south, but on the carbon credit side, the consulting side. So please come back. We'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcel. I work at Carbon Future since 4 years now, and it's actually also the 4th time I'm attending the Bio360 here in Nantes. So it's always a pleasure to be here. I have a background in life cycle assessment. and I'm working now since 4 years mainly with biochar related projects, but we are also doing all kinds of carbon preserving removal project at Carbon Future, especially like bags, ducks, but I would say biochar is by far our major use case. The projects I personally manage are all related in the biochar space. Since I would say the last 2 years we've grown quite a lot, thanks also to our major investor, the Six Group. We are now grown to 40 people. We have offices in Switzerland. Our headquarters is in Germany, in Freiburg, but we are also located in San Francisco in the US. And I would say our core business is on the one hand the acquisition of new carbon removal projects, specifically, like I said, located in the biochar space, where we do marketplace activities, so the sale of carbon credits. There we have a quite significant buyer pipeline currently, but also on the MRV side, we implemented a platform solution in order to track the biochar, ensure that it's being applied carbon preservingly, and we are cooperating with the different standards that are currently on the market. For example, we have a cooperation with Puro Earth, with Isometric, and also with Carbon Standards International, and there we are trying to automize basically also the data solution and feeding into the reporting of these different standards. So just to give you a quick outlook, this is currently an overview of our current bio pipeline. We on our end see that demand is quite growing, especially in the last years. Of course, there's I would say, significant pressure on pricing currently. That's why it was also quite fun to listen to the last debate. And I would say I have my personal opinion on that topic. Maybe we are also getting back to this. But yeah, it's I would say we have a very diverse portfolio of buyers, and it's I would say also very opinionated about what people expect from a biochar project and also what prices they see as realistic. Currently, we are working together with 12 projects in the Global South. One of them is a direct air capture project, but all the others are biochar-related projects. For the artisan projects, for example, that are hosted by Carbon Standards International, we don't do the DMRV service, but we integrate the data into our platform, and we do marketplace activities for these projects. For example, Biochar Live is one of our first projects, but we also have industrial scale projects in the Global South, with Exomer Green, for example, being one of the biggest biochar projects in the world, where we try to seek out existing buyers in our pipeline, but also new buyers in order to close multi-year agreements and offtake agreements in order to ensure long-lasting financing of these projects. That's it for now. So we have 3 people here at the Bio360. If you have any kind of questions about DMRV service or offtake models or also pricing of our services, yeah, just visit us at our booth right over there behind the North American Biochar Pavilion.
Thank you, Marcel. Next up, I'm sure many of you have heard of Puro Earth. They were the first to develop a biochar methodology 5-6 years ago. And here to tell us a little bit more about that is Julian.
Thank you. Merci. Hi, everyone. So Puro has been in existence since 2019, and I think our first biochar methodology came around in 2022. I hope I'm right. You know better than me, maybe. So we are a NASDAQ-owned company. We're a leading carbon standard and registry in CDR. We're currently based in 10 countries, but have our operations globally. I think we certify projects in over 20 countries at the moment. Our DNA and headquarters are in Helsinki in Finland, although our team is quite international. Last year, we passed the watermark of 800,000 credits issued, of which circa 350,000 have been biochar. So we have a well-tested methodology on biochar that is reviewed every 2 years to incorporate new science. We have, so biochar is one of our 5 methodologies. We also work with BEX and DAX and ERW and other things. And we right now have 2 methodologies in public consultation in Ocean CDR as well, if that's of interest to you. We have certified over 60 build projects. I mentioned build project because we do our certification ex post, which means that the projects need to have reached stable production for it to be pure certified. And we have 100 more in the pipeline. Puro and all of us here live in a market that has gathered over $3 billion of carbon credit sales in CDR. I've tried here to simplify the market, and now seeing this slide again, I don't know if that helps, but Puro is a standard and registry. So as a standard, Puro has a team of scientists that develop rigorous protocols or methodologies to issue carbon credits. This is overseen by an external advisory board that is headed by Matt Allen from the Net Zero Oxford Institute. We work with either the project developers directly or their tech partners, such as Carbon Future, for example, and we send those projects to audit under our certification methodologies. If they successfully pass that audit, which is performed by a third-party independent auditor, we issue what we call corks. Corks are carbon removal certificates that they can then monetize to finance their activities. The corks live in a registry that is also operated by Puro and powered by our shareholder NASDAQ. We have services also, which we call offtake and investment solutions, because we recognize the need for growth of this market and the need for off-takers and investors to participate more and more. So we have a series of pre-trade and post-trade service that we deploy there. We have set up a portal to facilitate basically the transactions of our corks, so whether it is for exchanges or retirements. And finally, we have built APIs which enable exchanges, sales channel partners to quickly commercialize this market so we can bring it to a state of liquidity and efficiency that is required for its scale. I did a nice graph here about our biochar cork issuances. So on the right-hand side, you can see the top line, which is the cumulative biochar corks we've issued to date. So that's about 350,000. And then the second line in light blue is the Global South part of that. The share of Global South biochar credits we've issued increased from 35% in 2023 to 62% in 2024, which is some real trend there. 100% of our issuances have been sold from 2023 and 97% from 2024, which testifies for the high demand on what we call the spot market. And another trend here is that South America accounted for 94% of Global South issuances in biochar last year. I'll go quickly. I took those data from a really good website called CDR FYI, which reports all the public offtakes in the market, to show also a bit what the forward market is looking like. So there's been close to 1 million CDR sales from Global South biochar projects in the market, contracted by way of offtake. South America is still in the lead with 61%, but it's closely followed, or not so closely, but followed by Asia with 35%. Roughly a fourth of all tons of Global South biochar that have been contracted by way of offtake have been delivered to date. Not saying that there is a lot of delays in there, but more that those are for forward delivery. And we'll speak to that as well, but we do observe a growing number of companies that use biochar in their portfolio as of 2024.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So now we're going to switch a little bit from the carbon markets to finance, and we have 2 people here on both sides of me that are going to give you a little insight on that aspect of biochar. So William, or Will, is going to talk to us about what Big Valley is doing in this space.
Hello all, my name is Will Howe. I am a partner at a Swiss impact investment advisory firm called Big Valley, formed last year. Myself and my partner Mauricio Benitez, we both used to work at Responsibility Investments, which is a Swiss impact asset manager. We've since started our own company and are in the process of raising a new blended impact fund, the Ag360 Climate Fund, which will be focused on financing circular bioeconomy solutions throughout the global south, with an overweight percentage of the portfolio dedicated to biochar projects. The fund, I'll try to advance. Well, it's okay. I can go like this as well. We are partnering with Puro Earth to my left at a fund level, and they are providing technical advisory support as well as pipeline development to the fund overall. We have also partnered with the consultative group on international agricultural research, CGIAR, which is a large international science NGO, who will be helping us with field soil trials and early stage pilot development for potential feeder of projects into the overall fund pipeline. At a fund level, we've partnered with Enabling Capital, who is also a Zurich-based asset manager whose background is largely in microfinance, though they also have a clean cook stoves fund. They currently manage around 750, 800 million in assets under management, and will be housing this fund. We will be acting as the investment advisors responsible for the investment portion of the fund strategy, and they will be housing it. They're FINMA regulated, etc. It is a 150 million target fund that will be, again, a blended fund. So we're aiming for roughly 25% participation from junior first loss investors who will ideally perform a catalytic role in attracting private capital into the fund, which will make up the senior tranche of the fund, the remaining 75%. Beyond that, we're also hoping to raise a technical assistance sidecar facility, which will be attached to the fund, which will also help develop kind of the scientific analysis or pilot stage projects of circular bioeconomy and or biochar projects that are not necessarily ready at the investment level, but could use grant or donor funding to get there, so that the technical assistance facility will not be a return-seeking vehicle. That's separate and is there as just development aid for projects that need help. The reason that we decided to base the fund's investment thesis around this is that we see strong fundamentals in biochar and in general in the transition to a circular agricultural model globally. That's something that we see about 350 billion in annual investment needed in the overall agricultural transition towards net zero food systems. Within that, we see biochar playing a pivotal role both on the climate mitigation side, but also for its potential strengths as a climate adaptation tool, especially as a soil amendment. Most of the projects that we're looking at financing ultimately have end use of the biochar that's produced as a soil amendment. That's not necessarily exclusionary at the expense of other end uses, which were discussed in the last panel, but it is kind of one of our headline criteria or for first pass analysis of projects that we're looking at. Moving on. This is kind of a high-level overview of the way that we see the fund breaking down between ag waste biochar projects and the rest of the fund's thesis being circular bioeconomy. Some key impact targets, estimate targets that we're hoping to hit. I think just a brief update, we are aiming for a Q3 2025 first close of the fund, for which we're aiming 70 million. We have spoken with more or less every DFI. We have strong traction in the DFI community, development finance institutions. For the junior tranche, we are now in the process of co-creating with 4 selected DFIs who are in advanced stages of due diligence on the fund and are helping us design kind of geographic criteria as well as other project selection criteria, where they like to have a very direct hand in fund design if they're ultimately going to be investing in the junior tranche of the fund. We also have been circulating the fund thesis and the fund opportunity through our partners Enabling Capital with private and institutional investors, where it's received very, very positive feedback and a lot of interest. So we're cautiously optimistic that we'll hit our Q3 close. Beyond that, Enabling Capital has several evergreen funds that are open right now, out of which we are working towards executing our first 2 investments even before we've closed this fund, to point to as track record of having successfully executed investments in Global South Biochar projects, which should kind of reinforce our case as we go through the fundraising process. I'm fresh off the plane from Southeast Asia, where I was on a due diligence trip up to a day ago, which will be our first executed transaction in a biochar project. So we're very excited about that. And with that, I will pass it on to my other financing partner here and wait for your questions.
Thank you, Will. Next up, well, first, did you say how much of your business is focused on Global South?
All of it.
All of it. That's good news. Okay, so Beryl is here to talk to us about Oiko Credit's role in biochar in the Global South.
Yes, thank you. So let's start with a question. Can we decarbonize agri-value chains and at the same time improve the livelihoods and resilience of low-income people in the Global South? And I believe that is true, and especially if we set out to do that from the start in projects that we're developing in the Global South. My name is Beryl van Andel. I'm an innovation specialist with Oiko Credit, and my background lies in financial inclusion and some venture capital. But most importantly for you today as audience is that I had the opportunity in the past year and a half to work on financing of a biochar project. Let me first briefly introduce Oiko Credit, because most of you will never have heard of that company. There's the presentation coming up. Oiko Credit is a social impact investor. And we invest with the vision to empower people to live a life of dignity. So what we do is really for a social angle. And the why in the 50 years that we've been investing with that goal has always been strengthening community resilience and advancing responsible investing. So where do we invest in? We have 3 main pillars. That's financial inclusion, which is about 80% of our portfolio. We do agriculture, where we finance cooperatives, processors, and also do some trade finance. And then we have renewable energy. And across these themes, we also look at what kind of new tools, what new things are coming up in the market that can help us to build on our vision of improving the livelihoods. Then I'll briefly give you some impact numbers. Our total portfolio is 1.1 billion. We finance 540 partners. This pink part is what we do in financial inclusion. Then we have a part of our financing in agriculture. And we also finance renewable energy. And then we invest, that's good to say, in 32 countries in the Global South. So that's Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Where we really try to create that social impact and with our partners support their growth to become investable for from commercial banks. Then I'm proud to say that last year we financed Net Zero in a long-term loan for the project in Virginia. And in that project, we really took the lens of climate resilience, value chain decarbonization, and sustainable income. It's a project in the coffee sector, where I believe it was a great learning curve and also very great to work together with Net Zero. Axel has told you about Net Zero, so I will not go into that. I will focus on the financing of it. In the value chain, we see the challenges of this value chain being CO2 intensive, where we see declining yields by farmers, synthetic fertilizers not always being accessible or affordable for farmers. And we have a problem around waste, especially in Brazil, the burning of coffee husk is not allowed. And we also see this barrier where farmers understand what to do with coffee or with biochar, sorry. The solution being biochar, and I'll not talk about that in depth because you know what biochar is, but I think the two last points there are the most important ones, is that in this pilot investment for us, we really want to validate the farmer business case. And we really want to see that that impact on the farmer is there. So not only benefiting climate, but that we create a sustainable income for these farmers and how that happens. And on the other hand, we also want to validate a financial product and financial instruments that can attract like-minded investors that then would also be willing to invest in these kind of products. Because if we want to reach hundreds or even thousands of these facilities, we need investment to come in. So that goal of creating an investable market is like the larger goal, but on the short term, I think there's still quite some points we need to learn, improve on, etc. And that's around, firstly, for us, scaling the partnership with Net Zero, also building a portfolio where we can also support and leverage the cooperatives that we work with today, because I really see a model where cooperatives could own biochar plants and get the financing in on their own hand, and even having more of the benefits going towards the local communities and the local farmers. I think the coming years will also be around crowding in other impact investors to provide the type of long-term financing that matches the needs of the projects in the global south, because commercial banks will maybe only be willing to do 4-year tenors, but then the financials of these projects just don't work. Then a point that was also raised in the previous panel by one of the people of the audience is the correct application of farmers. And I believe that's also where social impact investors can play a role in sensitizing farmers on what needs to be done, how they can apply it correctly. If they apply it correctly, they'll have the benefits out of that, and then over time build that trust. And from development projects, we have seen also in financial inclusion that just putting a tool or a method out there is not enough to get real utilization of such a tool or such a method. And then also on the financing side, I believe we'll have to build better securities around the corks, or see how we can build guarantee and first loss facilities to bring the perception of risk down to crowd in more investments. And then another thing I think will be very important to find the right business models and the right models to get the benefits of biochar to the local people. And that will also be an interesting way going forward. So if you have any ideas or questions around that, I'm happy to talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beryl. I'm so happy to see so much activity in the coffee industry. I wrote 2 white papers about how biochar can benefit coffee. The last one was 7 years ago, and since then, so much has happened. So I think it's amazing. I'm really happy. And my friend here, Marseille from DSS Plus Consulting, is also kind of working in that space. So she's going to tell a little bit more about that from the consulting angle.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm the only one in this panel who comes from the technical side of biochar application and production. I work at DSS Plus, and we are consultants. So my job is to help projects, but mainly not projects that want to focus on the biochar production and certification of the carbon credits, but projects like the coffee sector that want to include biochar as a parallel line in their business. So they want to take advantage of the waste of their own industry to produce biochar, benefit the soil long term, and also from the carbon credits and the insetting of these carbon sinks into their value chains. So, so what we do, it's not always the same. It depends on the project. But for example, one of the things we do is like transfer technology to the place where the biomass is. In this case, for example, this is an example of a machine in Brazil, which is also being tested in the Nespresso supply chain. And we are kind of, the objective of this pilot project is to reduce the emissions, the scope 3 emissions of the coffee and even others. And so what we do is transfer the technology to a technology producer in Brazil, in this case, and they produce the technology, we bring it to the farms, and the farmers produce biochar on site, and they apply it on site. So, and then we make sure that they are able to get the certification of the credit, so we kind of support them in all the process. So we help them implement, and we also help them design the field trials to prove to the farmers that it works, and we engage like everyone in the value chain in the projects. So what we can also do for companies is like assess their readiness to include biochar in their business. Like for example, any kind of, mainly food and beverage industries, but also other industries that have a big amount of waste. We can help them. For example, if they have multiple production sites, we can help them assess the readiness of each site and choose which one would be the best to try the pilot to include biochar in their supply chain. And we can help them identify what would be the best option to get certified credits in their value chain. So, well, in this case, here a little bit of a taste of the project, like the biochar production and the application in the field. And this is what we do. I just missed one of the points of my presentation was like what I think is really important when biochar is not the main activity of the project is the kind of support in the governance model, because if the main activity is not biochar, then we need to make sure that all the company is informed and knows about biochar at all levels, to even for the internal pitch, like to defend why we make biochar at the field level, but to the sea level, right? So this is what we can help companies do. And if you have more questions, I'll be around. Thanks.
Thank you, Merce. Last but not least is my former colleague, Dominic, from Carbon Standards International. And I think one of the things I am most impressed with CSI is that they were really the first to open up carbon credits to these smallholder farmers. And I really appreciate the effort that took and still takes. So here to tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Caitlin. It's always nice to share a panel, especially if it's the first panel that you are attending, to be among friends, old colleagues, because like Merce, I not started as an employee of a standard owner or registry owner. I started old school as a consultant in that field. So I did project development, feasibility study in the Global South in coffee. It's so funny that coffee seems to be one of the sectors where biochar gets applied. And then I switched over to the other side, kind of more regulation rules at Carbon Standards International roughly 1.5 years ago as the product manager for our global artisan ceasing standards dedicated to smallholder farmers using their own crop residues, turning into biochar with decentralized technology and directly applying it into the soil with the aim also to combine that with regenerative agriculture purposes and get them on the way. As Carbon Standards, we are a growing team as the market is growing. For us, it's important that we have the most reliable, innovative frameworks with our standards to empower partners like Carbon Future, like Merce, like Johannes and Retzikol that was in the panel before, to do cooling down the planet and bring every one of us on the next level. Because we can't do it alone. We need to be in a team, and that's what is our job, kind of, to build the frameworks that enables that. The fun part for working at Carbon Standards is that we are not known per se as a company. Our standards precede ourselves. Everyone knows, for example, when it comes to biochar quality, the European Biochar Certificate in the market, or kind of built the market since 10, 13 years and still growing. Recently, roughly a year ago, we realized that the Global South, or especially countries outside of Europe, they don't like to be challenged or judged according to European legislations and laws. And so we took what we know from the EBC, what works as a certification scheme, and turned that into a World Biochar Certificate with the freedom of having thresholds or limits when it comes to parameters like heavy metals to be more on the scientific side rather than politics and regulations. So the perfect fit in the Global South. So for us, the quality of a biochar comes always first when we do certificates or based on our global C-Sync standards when it comes to carbon credits. As Caitlin already mentioned, we're the only one with a dedicated standard, fully independent to other standards for artisanal, decentralized produced biochar. Smallholder farmers in the focus that can use their own crop residues to be independent from markets and so on, and to get into regenerative agriculture. With our global biochar C-Sync, we have a standard dedicated to industrial production with the requirements of EBC or WBC certified biochar. And before, the procedure standard was called EBC C-Sync. It was the first standard in the world for biochar carbon removals. I think the first credits and standards outline was published 2019, fully operational in 2020. And last summer, we did the next jump of improvement of the standard to be scientific on the next level. Include, as always, some nitty-pitty stuff to push the market to become better. One of our aims, we want to be forefront. We want to be the first movers that bring the market to more trust, more reliability, and to kind of combine this entire nature-based approach and vision that we have. We have a dedicated standard when it comes to tree growing, agroforestry, reforestation. So also part of this conversation here in this expo with biomass, where we look at carbon removals in single trees, kind of on an annual basis. But we have to be honest, old school, manual, you cannot do the scaling that we need. So we also develop tools that support us, our clients, certification bodies, partners. For example, our recently published and established new biochar tool, which helps, supports, handholds biochar producers on industrial scale from registration, technical pre-audit of their facility, certification of their biochar, and also when it comes to carbon credits, help them building the LCA from biomass sourcing to the factory gate. We have a background as a company in organic farming, so for us as well, we are in that sense in that field with an own calculation tool for on-farm emissions of farmers, mostly in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. Methane is a highly important topic at the moment, so we have a methane calculator online where biochar producers can, based on their testing, see if the semi-persistent fraction of their biochar that they get credits from us is enough to compensate the global warming effect of the methane. And last but not least, our registry, the Global C-Sync registry, fully digital, online, blockchain-based API connections to the most important DME providers like Kula, Carbon Future, Mangrove, installed and running since over a year, and many things more. When it comes to the Global South and all of us here, it's about partnership. It's working together because we cannot do it alone, and we, as a standard provider and registry provider, we want to give the framework, but we need everyone on this list. It's just a small outlook with whom we're working, who is our partner in that sense. And there's many more, and there will need to be many more, so that we can tackle climate change and turn the world into a better one.
Thank you. All right, I think we have 35 more minutes. I'm going to ask a question or two to kick things off, but if you have questions, we'll get to that pretty soon. And before I do, because probably some of you will start leaving, there are a couple of things I just wanted to highlight. There is going to be a Biochar conference in the Global South in May in Colombia. It's called Biochar 4. So if you are interested in learning more about what's happening, I highly encourage you to attend that. And then we are trying to get a group of people together after the drinks today at a restaurant, which I've already forgotten the name because it's in French, but it's something unique, really. That's in the name. So I have to go during questions and ask my friend at Arigna what the restaurant is. But hopefully we'll see you there as well. So just to kick things off, I wanted to ask what constraints to growth you see in the Global South that you might not necessarily see in the Global North, and how do you think they can or should or are being addressed? And this is an open question. If you have thoughts, let me know.
One thing that jumps out to me, certainly at the scale at which we're looking to provide financing, and maybe I skipped over this when I introduced our project, the Ag360 Climate Fund. We are a debt fund, and we're looking to provide tickets between 3 and 10 million typically per investment. And I think one thing that's much more difficult to find in the Global South, certainly today, are projects that are even at this scale and ready to take on this type of investment. I think there are a lot of very promising, exciting, compelling, high-impact projects that are a bit earlier in their capital needs, where they're still looking for that kind of initial injection of equity or forward-looking prepaid agreement to kind of get off the ground and operational. We're looking to provide more kind of growth-based debt financing to companies to take a next leap and build, a fleet of pyrolysis plants. And in that sense, it was a bit of a punt on our side to launch a fund with this thesis at this stage. And if you know a little bit about biochar in the Global South, you probably know the names of the handful of kind of leading players that are more mature and have more operations. So part of the punt is that hopefully the industry itself advances in the year it takes us to close the fund, and that there's that we're timing it right with a cohort of projects that will have a need for the type of financing that we are providing. So that's one, and I think part of that also boils down to access to capital, which is much harder to come by in the Global South for a variety of reasons, for economic volatility, political volatility, all of the reasons that typical investors are more cautious about putting money into these markets. And so the fact that we're able to approach it also with a blended approach, where we do have junior concessional first loss money that provides a cushion to kind of incentivize flows of private capital into this project, hopefully helps get private investors over that hump and feel more secure in committing to a fund whose thesis is this.
So some people may not have seen the curve or the graph that I showed earlier, but it tells a different story. So what it said there is that the share of global South biochar over total biochar issuances by PRO in the last 2 years has increased from 35% to 64%. So taking those numbers, like that, the South has a much bigger scale trend already in industrial biochar. So, that's not bad at all. Theoretically, I guess financing in the global South tend to be less available, or commercial lending, let's say, harder to get. I think that is very true, and that's great to have people here who are specifically dedicating funds and vehicles to that, and I think that's exactly what the market needs, and it's really amazing to see. One thing maybe that the South hasn't, or less of, compared to the Global North Biochar project, is diversity of cash flows. As we heard on the previous panel, you said that, lots of projects are relying on carbon finance 100%. And while that works for some investors, that already closes you a whole market of investors that want to know that if there is some wows in the carbon credit market, you can still sustain a debt or generate cash flow. So, examples of biochar projects in the global north have been able to, for example, secure offtakes on a diversification of cash flows. I'm not saying, some people in the global south was manage that as well, selling biochar, selling products. But in general, that is definitely something that could make those investments a little less bankable for some time, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you to a large extent. I wanted to add that, for us, from a project side, it's really like that 2 revenue streams are basically missing. So usually where you have the biomass, you don't have the infrastructure to make use of the heat. A lot of time it's already very warm, so you don't even need the excess energy to dry the biomass. So like from an energetic point of view, that's a waste, basically, that you don't really have in the global north. So every output is used in a way. The heat is being utilized, or electricity is being produced. You have the biochar that is being sold usually, and I would say every kind of output is basically used, be it also bio oil or other kind of outputs, and you don't really have that in the global north. I think that south, that's a disadvantage. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have heating networks, and that makes you, I would say, to a certain extent less resilient. And from a buyer's perspective, oftentimes, of course, it's also a matter of preference. Of course, I would say scale and pricing makes projects in the global south attractive. On the other hand, you have this please in my backyard tendency from a lot of buyers that they want to have carbon credits from countries where they have operations in. And I would say Southeast Asia has a pretty decent standing in that regard, but when it comes to like more, I would say, countries with a low industrial density where fewer companies are present, it sometimes turns out to be a disadvantage when it comes to actual buyer preferences for the sale of carbon credits, in combination with being overly reliant on carbon credits at the same time. That poses quite a risk in comparison to projects in the global north.
Another aspect I would like to add, if we look at projects in the global south, I think it will be very important if the theory of change of these kind of projects and the benefits towards farmers, etc., can be made more explicit. Because as was referred to before, there's less access to financing. So if we want to bring in investors like Oikocredit to invest in these kind of companies, that part of the whole model will be very important. And I think that's an opportunity that can be used, especially in the global south. The past year, we've been talking to quite a diverse group of, let's say, like-minded investors that are very interested in this theme, but they're also still a bit hesitant, I would say, because they want to see the proof of that social impact. They want to see the proof of what's really happening in the field, etc. So that's trust we need to build as an industry, I would say, and that's something that I feel is still a little bit lacking with many developers.
In my opinion, the comparison it's between the global north and the global south. But let's take into account that most of the countries in the global north together are the size of only one country in the global south. So scale, I would say it's a thing, because as Marcel pointed out, the global south is huge, and most of the production, the biomass, let's say, it's spread around the country. The geography is crazy. The size of the countries is crazy. So it has to be decentralized models to be able to take advantage of all the biomass and really to scale up. The problem is that when you want to certify a project, a decentralized project, which is not artisan, if you want, we can talk later. But that's a huge challenge, let's say, because you have to fulfill the standards, but the production is spread all around the territory, and it's really challenging to really make it work and to really empower the people who is going to produce that biochar and that carbon credits to do it properly according to the standards. It's really challenging at the level of people, production, certification. If it's centralized, no problem. And if it's the main activity, maybe no problem either. But if it's a side activity and it's decentralized, then it's a big challenge. Do you agree?
Yes. From my background or previous job and now what I'm doing at the moment, it's true. I think in the north, the market has found a way, a project description, how to run things like a recipe that can be multiplied, because it's like A to C. If you know, I can valorize the heat, I have a market for my biochar, I get the credits, you're good. But in the global south, usually you lack those things and you have to be more creative. So you don't fit in a standard case which makes, as a standard owner, having those conversations very interesting, but also the frustration potential on the other side is also there, and it's unavoidable. But usually when there's problems, you try to find a solution, and we grow together in this, and we can all learn from each other and see different things, because it's not one type of project, it's not one type of biochar. There are multiples, and each of them fit a certificate or a certain aspect and need in those countries.
This panel is so much more civilized and not arguing with each other.
We will fight outside, not on stage.
I'm asking the wrong questions. But it's interesting, hearing the North described as utilizing all the potential co-benefits. I'm from the States, and we don't. I wish we did. And I think that's a huge opportunity. But I think part of it was a technology constraint, that a lot of the technologies didn't come fully prepped to enable heat recovery or electricity generation. And that's the next generation we're seeing. But our energy is a lot cheaper than here in Europe, so it didn't make sense to invest all this money. So I think we're a little bit closer to the global south in that we wanted to get a lot for the biochar and the carbon credits, but there's still pretty small scale production numbers in the States, so not a lot are getting. That's why we're not on your chart yet, but I'm definitely glad to see the global south. But I'd like to see North America on there as well, since a lot of the buyers for those credits are coming from North America. So I had a couple more questions, but I think I'd like to see if there are audience questions for this panel. If you have a question, please raise your hand. A microphone will be brought over. Wow, everybody is stunned into silence. So I'm going to ask another question while we wait for that. So this came up a little bit with the last panel in terms of equity, in terms of revenue splitting, who gets what, does it stay in the global south? And people had differences of opinions as to whether it should, stay local or be split. I'm curious, especially on the finance side, where you're thinking in terms of repatriation of some of those revenues versus keeping it in the local economies where the carbon is being stabilized. Any thoughts? Do you have a line in the sand for what can stay and what must come back?
No, we don't have a line in the a line there, but yeah, okay, it's working. We don't have a line, but I would say we are all for creating these benefits locally. And it all has to do about how do you build the model to create the benefits locally. And of course, you have the levers between the price of the biochar and the price of the carbon credits, etc. And I think there, the most important part is that you have affordable pricing for local people to be able to purchase that biochar. And that can come in different forms. And what affordability is will depend per location, etc. But that is critical, and I can also sometimes be critical about it shouldn't be fully for free, because if it's free, it's like peanuts, and then you get monkeys, and then it's not valued. So I think that's an important one. But yeah, let's make sure a lot of these benefits end up with the local farmers, higher yields, stable income, better soil, etc. Secondary things like, because of the better soil, being more resilient and all of that, more food security because of that. I think there's so much of these benefits that should be there locally.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would have a question for you. You talk about benefits, but would you say money is also a benefit that should stay there? Or is it kind of part of your vetting process, kind of money-wise, what stays in the country? Or is it more like the co-benefits, higher yield increase that maybe lead to the money, to more money, but not really the revenue from carbon credits?
Well, the direct cash for these carbon credits doesn't need to go per se in the pocket of the farmer. That would be a nice model, but it depends on if it works. I know projects where they kind of do such things in agroforestry. But if you have to look at the whole model, how do you make it work in a way that the money flows work out for the developer, for the local farmers, for the cooperative, etc. So I also see a model where the cooperative is the owner of a biochar facility, and it's a technology provider that puts it there, maintains it, etc. And then, because the cooperative being the owner, the local benefits are all there for the local community, for the farmers. But that's a model I could think of. And there are probably more of these models. And I think going forward, we need to find the right models that work, and for the developers who are putting the risk out there, etc., but also work for the local communities.
Can I say something? Yeah. Maybe it's only in the coffee sector, because I heard otherwise in the previous panel. But in my experience, there is also an empowerment issue, let's say, because I think the biggest value is that the long-term investment in the soil, which is the natural asset, which is more valuable to all this, which sometimes belongs to the farmers. The problem is that they don't always value it in this way. I mean, they, of course, because they have whatever deals they have to sell their product, and maybe they cannot focus on the long term because they need to focus on the short term. But the problem I see is that, I mean, the carbon credits will fade with time, but what will stay is the soil. If we are really looking at this long-term gigaton carbon sink, then, I mean, if the biochar stays, then the big thing stays, the big benefit stays. But the problem is that it's not always seen like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, what I would like to see personally is, of course, it's great, you know, if some of the value also stays with the local livelihoods and the farmers, but some kind of technology transfer that you really have, you know, production in the global south. I think India is doing a pretty good job. For example, with Mathmatics, there's a technology transfer from the Danish university to India. It's being produced in India. And I think we don't need just money to end up in the global south from the carbon credit trade, for example, but like building up, you know, value chains, industrial value chains, and creating jobs with skilled labor and high-paying jobs. That's what I would personally like to see in the long run in the global south.
I'm glad you brought up Mash Makes. They were supposed to be on our panel from earlier, but they had visa issues. But I spoke to them in the last couple of weeks, and they are doing some really amazing things with farmers locally. And it is about technology transfer, it's knowledge transfer. It's how do you use biochar in different cropping situations? How do you measure results? And I think that, above all else, is what is needed to price the biochar locally to give it a value so that it's not given away forever. So yeah, they are doing some great things, and I think that's the model to follow moving forward. All right, is the audience still feeling shy, or are there questions that need to be asked? You all want the wine that's coming on soon, don't you?
Hiya, Nate McMillan again, AELCCS. I'm going to sound like a broken record again, but I'm going to try and elaborate and elucidate for the panel. It seems like we're sleepwalking into nomenclature, like just the nomenclature global south. You know, it's got some connotations. And then I see, I'm not going to pick on panelists. We also sleepwalking into barriers to entry into the whole biochar space. I mean, to Pure Earth, are you doing anything to capacity building, you know, in the global south, you know, to get certification and verification? And then there's a fund, you know, mentioned that only looking at scaling up. But, you know, to really open up the biochar space, you need to look at very small scale projects. That's what's there. They need to be helped, you know, from inception, you know, from pre-seed, seed, you know, once you set the bar and you say you're only going to work with established biochar operators to help them scale up, you are creating barriers to entry. And then one of the panelists, there was an unwillingness to literally put money in the pockets of the farmers. You know, we need, you know, to look at it this way. We are paying ourselves mega salaries in the industry, whilst those farmers, it seems like we're doing them a favor in terms of fertilizer. I think the farmers should be rebranded as developers. We should franchise out to them in terms of technology transfer, and we should actually just be brokers for the carbon credits that they produce, and we help them get them on the market. We need a paradigm shift. You know, otherwise we just sleepwalk into modern day slavery and barriers to entry into the market. And the market won't grow.
So Pure Earth's mission is to enable large-scale capital from corporates to do good. And this comes with a necessity to provide a robust framework that comes with some threshold, for sure, but also with a lot of safeguards, and notably around environmental and social aspects. We have developed a framework that started out on the carbon side of things, very much so, a few years back. And environmental and social safeguards, while always present, were not as formalized as they have been in recent years within Puro. We have, as of last year, released new rules that come with stringent documentation and reporting, again, sorry, that needs to be done and evidenced by the projects locally to hopefully mitigate some of the risks that could pertain to projects in the Global South. Puro in general has also made a decision to work with industrial projects when it comes to biochar, which tend to be more centralized, more tech-heavy. And we always encourage the biochar projects to really think through what use you're going to do of the biochar and how it's going to benefit the local communities. When you have a project coming to Puro without a clear plan on that, most likely they'll get a very delayed response. So that's something that's very important for us and that we're acting also more and more on.
I want to say something as well. I think you are right in some things, like most of them, for sure. Sorry. I mean, I agree in the thing that the certification standards, like all the protocols, of course, they are designed in the global north, because the need for the carbon credits at the end comes mainly from the global north. That's one thing, and of course it's a barrier because just the language of the guidelines, it could be one barrier, and this is completely true. I completely agree. And then there is this other thing that it's my experience. Maybe it's not true for everyone everywhere, of course, but farmers want to do farming. I mean, all the projects I've been in which involves farmers making the biochar, they don't see it. They don't want to make it. What they want is to keep on farming and not having extra work, because maybe the benefit of the long-term improvement of soil at that particular moment it's not perceived. Maybe because they are already super busy with farming, and maybe because they need to get the revenue from the farming to get to all, to earn their life living money. So what I think it's needed in the global south, it's maybe like entrepreneurships projects that help farmers make the biochar, but not the farmers themselves, because my experience is that it doesn't work. So that would be a breach that could save some of the barriers that you were mentioning. I mean, just entrepreneurship projects from the global south, but helping the farmers from the global south to make biochar and apply it, and to split the revenue between all of them. That's my...
Good. Maybe I can also a little bit elaborate, as Julian did, as a standard owner and developer. I mean, it's not always fun to do it, because you're in the middle of everyone. You have trade-offs between your own values and what you want to do. You have scientific that says we should already be like 5 years ahead in what we're writing our standards, but you also have the reality of people, what they can do on the ground, which is completely different between countries, regions, or within projects, kind of. And we have the challenge of, in biochar, of a physical product with a supply chain and a carbon credit with its own supply chain and transparency wishes and requirements that puts a lot of efforts and pressure on documentation, and all needs somehow to be fulfilled and respected, because no one helps if we do it like halfway, when no one is interested in the credits that basically is needed to finance such projects, because without the finance, there is no smallholder farmer that learns what biochar can do with his soils and with his yields. And without the trust of the finances, you don't get there. So it's a really chicken and egg thing, and it's not always easy, but I think we all try our best to come to closest reality as possible. And maybe we will get there and there in maybe some years, but it's still a steep learning curve ahead of us.
Yeah, I also wanted to react to the discussion we had earlier about where does the money go, and does it go into the pocket of that farmer? And I think going into the pocket of the farmer is a bit oversimplified. But I think the most important part there is that at least when we as Oiko look into these kinds of projects, we really look also at that farmer business case. So being part of such a development should add to the farmer's business case. So it can add in many ways. But the farmer should be not only better off with improved soils, but also be better off with a sustainable income, and because of that have a better standard of living. And that is what's most important for us as Oiko. So when earlier I referred to, like in a project, the money from the carbon credits doesn't need to go directly into his pocket. It means you have to look at the whole model and how does that whole model work, and do farmers benefit from that in the way that their business model improves over the long term.
I guess just one last comment quickly to touch on providing growth scale debt to these projects. I don't share the idea that that's introducing a barrier. I think it's growing the overall pie of financial products that are available to people and to developers who need them. You know, we're talking about providing long-term patient capital that's 5 to 7 years at below commercial rates that are available in these markets. It is still development finance that's subsidized by development finance institutions. So is it out of range for some people, and would it be nice to have more early stage, seed stage equity going into these projects? Absolutely. But I don't view adding a new source of funds as subtract